In the 1964 television serial The Dalek Invasion of Earth, there were two closely linked elements which both changed considerably from draft script to screen. In Terry Nation's original draft, a pack of alien creatures from the Daleks' home planet patrolled a vast expanse known as the Abyss. The monsters, called slithers, were conceived by the writer to look a particular way, but were then realized quite differently, and then hastily redesigned mid-production. Plus, a completely different version was conceived with a surprising appearance, but it was never implemented. So what were all these alternative versions of the monster? Why is there no mention of the abyss that it roamed in the final TV episode? And what does any of this have to do with an 18th century book about English plants? In Terry Nation's draft script for The Invaders, which would eventually be retitled The Dalek Invasion of Earth, we first hear about the strange menace of the Slithers in episode 4, from a black marketeer called Ashton. Ashton is set upon by Ian and the character of Robbie, who was later changed, and Ashton is relieved that his attackers are human and not, as he says, one of the Slithers. In the final screen version, there is only one Slither, but in this draft there are more. Ian asks about them, and Ashton explains,
"It's an animal the Daleks brought with them from their own planet. At night they use them as guard creatures, like things you see in nightmares, like a huge black jellyfish."
The creation of the costume was given over to Shawcraft Models of Uxbridge, who had been responsible for the Daleks, although their expertise was in model making rather than this kind of organic monster costume. They wrapped a thick tarpaulin fabric around a framework with a boiler suit underneath to create a bottom half like a skirt, and a saggy triangular top half fitted over the performer's head. Trailing rubber tendrils were attached around the brim of the head to hide the join between the two halves of the costume. The surface of the body was decorated with clumps of string, which also helped disguise the air holes needed for the performer inside. A strip of thick foam was added down the front of the costume, and a knife was used to cut out angular chunks to add more texture. There was a functioning pair of arms for the actor to manipulate at the top of the costume, and a second spindly false pair below, with a wire core to keep them outstretched. Shawcraft painted it a two-tone green with patches of pink colouring to pick out the creature's orifices, as seen in this brief colour film clip of the head. So this was how the costume appeared when it was first readied for recording of episode 4, but it's certainly not the end of the story of the development of the Slithers' screen appearance, as we will see. But before we get into that, let's examine its hunting ground. In Terry Nation's version of the script, the Daleks' operation on Earth was to cut an enormous trench across the surface of England. Where there used to be a city called Manchester, the Daleks dug a pit 1/2 mile across and 2 miles deep, and their plan was to detonate an explosive at a precise location within the fissure that they had created. Such was the significance of the chasm that the invaders were carving that episode 4 was originally called The Abyss. In his script, he advises that library film should be found of the vastest open cast or quarry project, and to cut in images of huge encampments and haulage equipment. So these clips were selected for the final episode, including stock footage of a cable car, which is a plot point we'll come back to. The real-life location, chosen to represent the Dalek mine, was a quarry near a place fittingly called Stone, not far from Dartford in Kent. There was a chalk pit which would fulfill the requirement of portraying the Dalek mining operation. The quarry was located at a place called John's Hole. Contrary to popular belief, John's Hole is not, in fact, the name of the quarry itself. It's actually the name of the hamlet nearby, the name of which predates the start of quarrying by at least 200 years. The earliest written references I can find, in a book about indigenous botany, date the name to at least the 1790s, and actually call the place Jack, in the Hole. But just to confuse matters, there are also some later references to St. John's Hole. According to a book from 1928, the locals cannot explain this mysterious name, but it was always called John's Hole on the maps. including when the Doctor Who production team scoped it out for location work. At this site, scenes were filmed using a goods wagon decorated with Dalek symbols, and human slaves pulled it manually along the track, giving a good impression of the open pit that Nation had wanted. But once Terry Nation handed over his script, it was then the job of story editor David Whittaker to make it work, and he saw a problem with episode 6, which we'll look at later. In his process of reshaping the ending, Whittaker needed the mine operation to focus on there being underground shafts and tunnels instead of an open pit, and for this reason, one particular site at the location became the focal point for much of the action. Often referred to as the mine entrance, what you're actually seeing here is a tunnel between two halves of the quarry which ran under the A226 London Road. Note in the footage the sweeping curve of the railway, the slope to the left, and the cliff face to the right. On this contemporary map you can see the same sweeping curve of the railway, the slope is illustrated to the left, and the cliff face is here. This is the tunnel running under London Road, marked on the map as the Mineral Railway, which continues off to the north. This 1960s aerial photograph shows the matching location, and the route of the Mineral Railway emerging from the north side of the road. The goods line allowed the freight which was mined to be hauled about a mile up to the vast cement works, although the track also links to the docks on the banks of the Thames. Backtracking the route which the humans had been dragging the truck, you can see in this photograph where the line loops around alongside the quarry face where the vast diggers are working away. Perhaps that very freight truck used in the Dalek invasion of Earth is actually one of those captured in this photograph. So as mentioned, Whittaker steered the Daleks' operation away from just an open trench in the ground and towards shaft mining. But the big surface operation was retained in order to provide some spectacle. As a result, although the Abyss was no longer important in Whittaker's rewrite, the final screen version was a jumbled fusion of the two types of mine, and in fact the Daleks' operation map shows both elements, with a significant trench seen in the cross-section as well as the vertical shafts down below. Other scenes preserved the idea of the Abyss, even though it was no longer mentioned in the revised script, such as when the Doctor and his friends look over the edge and into the mining area. Similarly, Ian and Robbie reach a different part of the trench whilst fleeing the slithers and gaze down into the seemingly bottomless pit. As the jellyfish beasts advance, Nation's original draft described the sound they make as like water running out of a plug hole and an asthmatic wheezing, followed by a wet flopping sound. The sound effect which was created by Brian Hodgson at the Radiophonic Workshop was a remarkably close interpretation of this description. The cliffhanger for episode 4 merely refers to a shapeless, pulsating mass coming towards them, and Nation says to show the creatures for not even a quarter of a second so as only to suggest them. The episode was recorded on the 9th of October 1964, and, as per Nation's recommendation, these glimpses are all we get. Although the draft script suggests at least 3 slithers stalking the edge of the abyss, the TV version's dialogue indicates there is only one. But, ironically, due to a recording break after Ashton was eaten by the creature, and the fact that in the next shot we can see the slither at the edge of frame here when we're not supposed to, it means that the monster has switched locations with such speed as to actually make it appear as if there is more than one. Inside the costume, performer Nick Evans, who had also been a Dalek operator in the rest of the story, hunched forward and moved with slow, pulsating movements, portraying a jellyfish to the best of his ability. The shape of the costume and the position of the head, if it has a head, was kept deliberately indistinct. It was the programme's first true monster, in the sense that it was neither humanoid nor robotic, and it was enormously popular, despite, or perhaps because of, its fleeting appearance. This internal memo to producer Verity Lambert says that the BBC Drama publicity officer has advised there are a lot of inquiries about the slither, and people wanted to know how it was made. A couple of days after broadcast of the first Slither episode, Nick Evans was visited by a journalist from the Daily Mail, and the paper printed a short piece on the 14th of December. Thirsty for information about this truly alien creature, the journalist got Nick to draw it, and this was the result. The newspaper notes that next Saturday the Slither appears again in Doctor Who. They contacted producer Verity Lambert for comment, to be told that its future is undecided. But what wasn't explained when the newspaper went to print was that after recording of episode 4, the costume was sent back to Shawcraft for modification, and Nick Evans' drawing was no longer accurate. This photograph, taken on the 9th of October, is the last time the costume looked this way. It was decided that the Slither needed a little more form to it, to take it away from Nation's shapeless jellyfish, and it would be made more like a traditional alien beast. It would be shown on screen for longer. The team at Shawcraft rebuilt the head, giving it different internal bracing, so that the triangular head was enlarged into a dome shape, and then 2 looping stalks were added with eyeballs on the end. The stalks were made from a polystyrene-like substance called jablite, often referred to in paperwork as jabalite, and its surface was cut into to create an angular knobbly skin. The plastic balls used for eyes came with bumps already moulded into the surface. Although eyes on stalks is something of a general science fiction cliché, it is a design feature shared with the Magnodon, which also lived on the planet Skaro, and of course the Dalek casings themselves. And when designer Raymond Cusick was asked to create a model of the Dalek mutant, he produced a creature which also had eyes on stalks. So perhaps this is a common evolutionary trait on Skaro, for some reason. The revamped costume was prepared for recording of episode 5 on the 16th of October 1965. But the previous week's costume was still present in the recap. So initially in episode 5 we see the original form of the costume, with its triangular shaped head, but after it cuts to close-up and then back to the wide shot, the head of the costume has changed shape and suddenly sprouted 2 new eye stalks. With the new costume being a more discernible body shape, the camera lingers on it for considerably longer than the quarter of a second that Nation suggested. It's then shown in full shot for several seconds as the humans manage to get into the vertical freight truck, which has magically appeared since the last episode. They force the creature to drop down into the abyss, and then they're safe. In the draft, they note that the remaining creatures back off and don't try to jump. So that was the end of the Slither on TV. After recording was over, we know that the makers of the costume, Shawcraft, retained it because it resurfaced again on the back of a float at the Southall Carnival on Saturday the 10th of July, 1965. Alongside it were the TARDIS console, 2 Zarbi, a Venom Grub, a Mechanoid, and a Dalek. This photo taken by Graham Rye provides the best colour reference we have for the costume. The Dalek at the Southall Carnival was rather ingeniously fixed to the front of the lorry, and it was temporarily reinstalled with the bigger fender that it had had the previous year for the Dalek invasion of Earth. The prop in question was a prop we covered in our first episode of Series 1, in which it debuted by hovering across Camber Sands. Remarkably, this is one of the few 1960s Daleks still to survive. After it was renovated a few years ago, fragments of its fiberglass that was shed in the refurbishment were preserved. And this background information allows me to seamlessly transition, without you even noticing, into telling you that we've teamed up with the Movie Reliquary to offer 10% off to any of our viewers who wish to purchase one of these beautiful limited edition display cases, which have a tiny piece of one of Doctor Who's rarest props captured inside. There's a link in the description if you want to read more. Sadly, we can't say anything similar about the survival of the Slither costume, although it was still around for at least another 18 months after the Southall Carnival, as it was glimpsed in this amateur film footage taken at Shawcraft's workshop in February of 1967. The next few months would see the deterioration of the relationship between Shawcraft and the Doctor Who production office, and it's likely that the storage of the show's props and monsters became a bone of contention, resulting in many of them being junked, including, unfortunately, the Slither. So back to the Dalek invasion of Earth, and the question of the Abyss, which disappeared from the script. The reason it was removed was linked to the fact that the Dalek's plan changed during rewrites. In Nation's draft version, when one Dalek reports that all that remains is to put into position the penetration explosive, it then adds that the charge will be suspended in a cable car, here, and it points to the map. The charge would then be released and strike the fissure, and when the Dalek refers to the fissure, it originally meant the abyss. The idea was that the Daleks have carved the abyss, aka the trench, across the Earth's crust like a pilot hole, and then the detonation of the capsule in the right part of the abyss would cause the surface of the planet to rupture further, the fissure would expand, and the molten core would spill out. Since the molten core produces the Earth's magnetic field and the planet's gravitational forces, then by removing them, the Earth would stop rotating and would no longer be in a stable orbit around the Sun. The Daleks would then be able to control its movement and use it as a generational spaceship to make journeys of thousands of years. In Nation's version, the explosive needed to rupture the fissure is winched out across the trench suspended in a cable car. But unbeknownst to the Daleks, Ian has hidden inside the cable car, and his extra weight causes the cable to start to break. Upon seeing him inside, the Daleks winch the cable car back, but Ian escapes down the face of the abyss before the cable car re-enters the launch bay. The Daleks check over the bomb carrier, they decide that it's fine, and then they send it back out over the abyss. As luck would have it, 50 feet before it reaches the correct position, the cable starts to give, and one of the Daleks helpfully informs the audience that, if it falls there, it will destroy us all. And then it falls. Nation specifies film of an atomic explosion, followed by clips from the film Volcano, and we see model Daleks smouldering in the ashes. He also suggests melting a wax Dalek. By extraordinary luck, all the Daleks are wiped out in the blast and the lava, but our heroes all escape, despite also standing right next to this eruption. Script editor David Whittaker clearly didn't like the fact the Daleks were defeated by pure luck. Ian had no idea that his presence in the cable car would cause the cable to snap, which seems improbable anyway, and it also relied on the Daleks overlooking the fact that the cable was on the verge of breaking when they sent it back out over the abyss. So Whittaker decided it would be far more satisfying if Ian deliberately interfered with the delivery of the bomb after overhearing how important it was. But that kind of sabotage wasn't very easy to contrive with the cable car setup, so instead Whittaker changed it to become a capsule delivered into a vertical shaft, and this would allow its route to be physically blocked on the way down. The result of this change was that the abyss became redundant, because the Daleks actually only needed to drill a hole the diameter of the capsule. References to the Daleks' original plan were removed, and the dialogue left in the broadcast episode about the capsule striking a fissure in the Earth's crust doesn't say that the Daleks themselves dug the fissure. So the Daleks' enormous open-cast mining operation made little sense in the final TV version, or was, at the very least, left unclear as to its relevance. And then the idea of the pit was completely eliminated when the serial was adapted for the big screen version, entitled Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD. The movie script by Milton Subotsky specified that the Daleks were digging alongside an existing old mine shaft, which allowed the plot to be tightened up so that Doctor Who could actually be proactive and formulate a plan in advance to divert the bomb into a place which would defeat the Daleks using the Earth's magnetic power. The accidental victory from the TV version is further toned down by tweaking it so that Doctor Who feeds Tom, who replaced Ian, the information about diverting the bomb for him to act upon. The volcanic aspect was downplayed, and the unleashing of Earth's magnetic forces became the solution to the problem of how the Daleks were all conveniently blown up in the TV version. Subotsky had the metal aliens instead crushed by the powerful magnetism. And that tweak to make the Daleks' metal casings more important to the plot might just explain another tweak which took place to an alien which sadly didn't end up on screen. In Subotsky's original draft of Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD, the Slither was going to feature, although in a different form, which would also be affected by the magnetism. During this scene, after they clobber the Roboman, Wells explains that the Slither is
a creature that Daleks send out to track down escaped prisoners. It's made of metal.
The Slither in the movie was to be given more screen time, presumably in the wake of all the interest expressed in its TV counterpart, and it hunts through the darkness of the mineshafts in several scenes. Other than it being metal, the only description in the script is that it has gleaming eyes. These were the scenes in which it was originally scripted to appear, chasing our heroes down the tunnel, cornering them after they fight the Roboman, and continuing to pursue Tom and his companion. Perhaps for reasons of cost, or concern over whether they could make any kind of effective creature, the metallic Slither was sadly written out of the movie version of the Daleks' mining operation. a mine that started out as an immense abyss that scarred the Earth, eventually reduced to a mixture of tubes and tunnels. The open-cast imagery made little sense in the final screen version, but the resultant storyline was far better because Ian Chesterton got to single-handedly save the world. Please hit the subscribe button if you're new to our channel, as we have more content like this coming soon.